As a young Christian, sometimes it's very difficult to know exactly how to spend your alone time with God. It gets very confusing. There's a whole lot of Bible, a whole lot of resources. The Bible app has an overwhelming amount of studies and stuff to do, and that's just one app. It's really hard to know how to spend your morning time. You hear sermon after sermon, Instagram video after Instagram video of how people spend their mornings, and you see all these girls these days, their morning routine. You see their makeup routine. You see all these athletes, what I eat in a day. You see all that, but truth be told, as Christians, it's hard to know how to start our morning with God. How does what role does prayer play in it? Is it out loud? Is there a list? Do I do it for 30 minutes? Do I do it for an hour? And as a young pastor, when I started at 19, it became very difficult over the years to know how to spend my mornings with the Lord. That became very difficult. And so I had to start putting something together that was going to help me find my rhythm. What was my mornings with God going to look like? And I tried different things here and there. I tried that life journal. I tried just getting in my Bible and picking a random story and saying, okay, I'll read this right now. And I've got to be honest, it never really caught a rhythm for me. I never really found a lot of value in some of the studies, because I felt like I was hearing somebody else's voice when I wanted to hear God's voice. And sometimes it's great to hear God's voice from other people's, but I felt like I wanted to hear God's, because this was my alone time. I'm going to be listening to sermons in church all the time, but I want some alone time. I'm reading all these books of people that will help me understand God's nature even better, but I want to hear his voice in my alone time. So I'll never forget, I started thinking, because someone asked me, what was the greatest sermon you've ever preached? And I don't know why, when they asked me that question, I kind of sat back and was like, oh my gosh, I don't ever preach to myself. And all of a sudden, this idea of how do I spend my alone time with God? And as a preacher, what am I preaching to myself? It all kind of came together. And I created what I call my sermon to myself. Now, I'm sure that's not new at all. I'm sure people have been running with that title for hundreds of years. I'm sure if you type in sermon to myself, there's going to be way better pastors than me that give you that same kind of thing. But basically, what my version of it is just 5 real simple sections. Just a document of a bunch of different lines that I'm telling my spirit, this is what we're going to think about today. This is what we're going to ponder. It's that whole verse that I'm going to think about these things. I'm not going to think about this. I'm going to think about this. That's how I start my alone time with God. And so, of course, it just starts with being thankful for certain things. And as this document, I've been using it for 5 years now, it grows, and I find a verse that I really like in 1 Peter when he says, you guys are being built up. I was like, I love that, like a spiritual house. So I start with things I'm thankful for and just random verses that I really, really like. But when you get into the meat of it, it starts with who God is. And I've got like 30 things about who God is, that he is King of Kings and he's Lord of Lords. And my alone time with God starts with reminding my spirit and anything trying to come against me of who God is. And then I go into what he says, because it's important to know what God says about me, what he says about my day. A couple years ago, I added specifically who Jesus is and specifically what Jesus has done. He has all of the power just in his name. And whenever I get to that part, I find myself just declaring the name of Jesus over every individual area of my life. Jesus over my relationship with my wife. Jesus over our side businesses. Jesus over our church. Something as simple as Jesus over my thought life. I find myself praying for my wife as I know she's sleeping, and I just start saying Jesus over every aspect of her life, every single thought she thinks, every dream she has. I just declare the name of Jesus. So it starts with who God is, what he says, who Jesus is, what Jesus has already done. And then I end it by saying, Lord, because of all that, this is who I am. And this is actually the longest part of the document, not because it's the part I need to be reminded of the most, not because I'm selfish and I think I'm the best part, but because when you sit back and realize who God is, what he says, who Jesus is, what he's done, there's so much about who we are as his children. And it takes about 15 minutes. 15 minutes, and it blesses me in ways you could never imagine, because I feel like I'm praying. I'm also worshiping. I'm thanking him. I'm reminding myself that he is holy. I'm reminding him that I know he's holy. And that after 15 minutes with some worship music, I don't find myself wanting to get out of it. I find myself getting into my word and just reading left to right. So I've been doing this sermon to myself for a long time, and I got to tell you, it's my favorite sermon. It's the best sermon I've ever preached. There are seasons where I do it daily. There are seasons where I don't. But I'm going to make my sermon to myself available in the notes of this video, just so you can check it out. And maybe it's something that you can try. So I'm putting it in the notes. You're going to see the sermon to myself, and maybe it becomes your sermon to yourself.